Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Policies, all about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Fifth Harmony, titled Reflection. But first, let's talk a little bit about competition in music. In some cases, it's been there since certain genres' inception. I mean, hip-hop would not be the same without various MCs fighting for the crown of who's the best. And ever since the beginning of rock music, there's been beefs and fights, most of the time driven more by the fans of the respective bands than by the bands themselves. Or you get cases like the absolutely ridiculous beef between Sun Kil Moon and the War on Drugs last year. Two indie acts where it seems like the music media hyped up the feud a lot more than Mark Kozlik ever did, treated the whole thing with the grumpy, tongue-in-cheek style for which he's famous. But if you want to look for the definition of contrived competition, you need to look no further than pop music. I mean, it's been around in some form or another for decades. But look at, say, the fight between the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, for example, to see the insane marketing genius at work. I mean, they both had similar management, they both work as similar songwriters, they both had songs that could be mistaken for the other if you didn't have a keen ear for the details or the subtleties, and in both cases, it was the management that milked the competition to drive up sales in the late 90s for as much as they possibly could. And ever since then, various record labels have tried to recreate this lucrative strategy, and yet it rarely ever clicks. Mostly because getting that dual balance and the timing is incredibly difficult. It started to seem like there'd be another boy band war starting with The Wanted and One Direction in 2012, but The Wanted, they just couldn't stick the landing stateside. A shame, because I actually like their style and sound a hell of a lot more. And One Direction won out under the direction of Simon Cowell's Psycho Records. And yet you can tell that Simon Cowell, he wanted to replicate the money printing boy band war, and for a second in 2013, it started to look like he had all the pieces in place for a girl group war. Both signed to his label so he could reap profits from both sides. One was British, one was American, they both came from X Factor, his show, and yet the timing just misfired. Not only did Little Mix hit the market first, they also dropped two albums, the second of which, Salute, I actually liked a fair bit. But I had significantly bigger misgivings about their American competition, Fifth Harmony, because while they managed to drop a couple singles and make more of an impact in the States on the charts, they could barely penetrate beyond it to a larger European market, and that debut album just got delayed time and time again, mostly because a lot of the singles were a lot less interesting. Or good. Undaunted, I figured I might as well give Fifth Harmony something of a chance to impress me in the same way the Little Mix did. So I checked out their debut album, Reflection. How is it? Well, it doesn't impress me all that much. And unlike previous Psycho Records albums, I can't just point at the production and say that's the problem and walk away. No, Fifth Harmony, they've got much bigger issues across the board. And this leads to a debut that's both underwhelming and yet surprisingly easy to make a lot of really bad jokes about. I'm gonna try to restrain some of my snarkier tendencies and be fair here, but fair warning, some of these lyrics, okay, we'll get to it. So let's start with our five ladies. And I wish I could say they all have roughly equivalent talent and pipes, but yeah, while I be able to tell them all apart, which is a good thing, the weak links are often pretty apparent. Lauren and Normani are the consistent standouts for me, and Dinah's not far behind. Hell, even Ali's got a pretty solid lower range that has some soul, and if the producers knew what the hell they were doing, she'd likely sound pretty good behind the microphone. But the one who shows the most glaring weaknesses is Camilla. I mean, she's got energy, but she badly needs more classical conditioning and training, because her moments of going sharp are pretty blatant and honestly pretty obnoxious. Granted, 80% of this band are still teenagers, and probably deserve to be cut a little bit of slack against Little Mix, who are all older and sound a lot more conditioned and professional. But I'm not denying that Fifth Harmony do have potential. Hell, that final track, We Know, a more of an a cappella inspired breakup song that allows them to harmonize more, it's easily the standout song on this album. I actually liked it. But most of this is handicapped by problems in the production and the instrumentation, the most glaring being on the vocals. I'm just gonna repeat what I usually say about how R&B flavored pop girl groups should never need obvious auto-tune, especially if they're calling back to groups like TLC and Destiny's Child, which they obviously are. But there are moments where the pitch correction is tuned back and the inexperience is glaring through, so I get why it's here. What I don't get is the approach on the instrumentation, mostly because it doesn't complement anything on these songs. Like most modern pop, the percussion is cranked up way more than it should be, but instead of synths, they threw in all these blaring horn presets, which makes the tracks clatter and rattle with little smooth momentum or potent groove, to say nothing of a good cohesive melody. And sure, Competition was the best track from Little Mix's Salute, I get trying to imitate it, but the piano drove the melody on that song more than the horns ever did, and trying to rip it off into the most inelegant ways possible doesn't do your album any favors. And speaking of rip-offs, I could speak on how Everlasting Love is trying desperately to be Right There by Ariana Grande featuring Big Sean, but the real problem is Like Mariah, written and produced by J.R. Rodham and of course featuring a blatantly obvious sample. The problem is that the sample is of Mariah Carey's Always Be My Baby. And let me state this definitively. If you're gonna be stupid enough to sample Mariah Carey on an R&B song, don't ever sample a snippet of her vocals in the background, because I'm immediately going to tune in and focus how much more I'd rather listen to Mariah Carey than any of these girls, because none of them are on her level yet. Now, to be fair, there are instrumental moments I don't mind on this album. The drum progression on the chorus of Sledgehammer, it's the highlight of the song. This Is How We Roll, it had a pretty damn good chorus before the Black Eyed Peas Dirty Bit inspired change-up for the verses that knocks this below Florida Georgia Line song with the same title, and I did like the bouncy Jamaican flavor of Them Girls Be Like. But outside of that, most of this album is attempting to jump on the very minimalist flavor analogous to what a lot of DJ Mustard's doing, except none of the synth tone choices are anywhere close to being as good, and that's saying something. But now we get to the lyrics. And look, Fifth Harmony, they didn't write any of these songs. I'm not blaming any of the girls for bad songwriting. But wow, when I can find this many lyrics that are bad or at least plainly easy to make fun of within one listen of a song, we got problems here. Now, the key thing to note is that the primary theme behind the majority of this material, it's pretty simple-minded. It's broadly sketched girl power anthems, not for me, all about bragging about being awesome. And let me make this clear, I'm not criticizing the choice of theme here. If you want to make an album full of shallow pump-up material, there is nothing wrong with doing that. And hell, you can look at albums like the Blind Guardian record I covered yesterday as falling into a very similar power fantasy role, albeit more for the male gender. My problem here is in the execution, and it starts with the technical songwriting. I don't know if the writers just didn't care, but the number of flubbed or forced rhymes, clumsy meter, or lyrics that just went nowhere or made less sense the second you started thinking about them, that's a problem. For instance, on Boss, putting aside how the songwriters thought the best thing that they could do and they could have Fifth Harmony do with name-dropping Michelle Obama and Oprah is brag about spending money and flashing their cards, they say on the song they want a Kanye and not a Ray J. Should I even go into all the details of the terrible bars that Kanye has surrounding women? Or her following bar saying that she's a Maybach, not a Volvo. What, incredibly overpriced and barely functional and then discontinued? Or on This Is How We Roll with writing courtesy of Dr. Luke and Circuit, where they talk about how they're making it clap, but they don't need their hands for that. Ugh, lovely. Just another song where an incredibly thin party track basically boils down to Fifth Harmony singing about their butts. I should remind you all that they're teenagers. Kinda creepy there, just saying. But when the songs attempt to get a little bit more complicated, then they really run into problems. Like on Them Girls Be Like, which starts off trying to slam girls who are too vain, and yet then spins around to play the empowerment anthem because the girls in Fifth Harmony are really all just like them. I can see the attempt at satire here, but it's not framed properly because at the end of the day, Fifth Harmony are still bragging about being more popular and getting more likes on Instagram with no self-awareness. It's still just as shallow. Or take the title track, which is all about blowing off some arrogant asshole by paying him lots of compliments and then saying they're all directing all those compliments at their own reflection. It's a cute premise, but when your second verse where you start then complaining about a tight dress and uncomfortable shoes, which they all put on for this guy trying to win him over, and then by spending the chorus basically staring in the mirror glorifying all of it and trying to make it all seem empowering, well, at the very least, you just come across just as vain and self-obsessed. Even on the more straightforward love songs, they stumble here, like on Everlasting Love, where it seems like your standard head over heels crush song until you realize in the bridge that they don't even know the guy's name or know him at all, and you're already proposing Everlasting Love? A little bit quick there. Now, the one song that did do something a little bit outside the girl group formula was Sugar Mama, which is basically telling the guy to get a job already if they're gonna be together so she doesn't have to pay for everything all the time. Yeah, it's a fine enough sentiment, but compared with the plain adolescent sentiment of the rest of the album, it just doesn't ring nearly as strongly as it should. And speaking of lack of impact, Tyga and Kid Ink contribute verses to this album. And outside of Tyga calling himself T-Raw and inspiring hysterical laughter from me, nothing they say is all that worth remembering. Completely forgettable, you can move on. But at the end of the day, Look, I get that Fifth Harmony is plainly not intended for me, but even by the standards of music intended for teenage girls, it's painfully thin, lacking the pipes and charisma of Ariana Grande, the personality and fire of a Beyonce or Nicki Minaj, the lyricism of Lucy Hale or more recent Taylor Swift, or even the broader universality of someone like Meghan Trainor. Going with the much sloppier writing, the weak production, and vocals that really do need additional training and work, I'm sorry, it's a 4 out of 10 and I can't recommend this. I'd say that they'd be worth checking out if you're already looking for a girl group, but given that we already have 2 albums from Little Mix already that are both better than this, I'm sorry, I'm gonna stick with those. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd be like to subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I can imagine some of you are getting kind of angry that I came down as hard as I did on Fifth Harmony. I have nothing against the girls, it's the problems with the songwriting, which they plainly didn't do, and they just need more time. I'm sure, give them probably 4 or 5 years, if they stay together that long, they'll probably sound better. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.